It's a question that seems to come up every single year. For nearly a decade, people have been asking, is Planetside 2 dying? And yet somehow it's still here. On one side, you still get moments like this. Massive battles with hundreds of players, armor zergs pushing between bases, aircraft fighting overhead, and infantry spawning on the flanks utilizing rocket launchers and sniper rifles. These are the moments that make Planetside 2 feel alive and unique. But on the other hand, we're also seeing more moments like this: empty bases, half-open continents, and not enough players to trigger alerts or sustain the massive fights that really are Planetside 2's biggest selling point. So is Planetside 2 dying, and if so, will it die in 2026? In this video, we're going to seriously look at that question. We'll examine the player numbers and population trends, the main arguments people make for why the game might be dying, and some of the long-standing bugs and technical problems players constantly run into. But we'll also look at the other side, the reasons many players believe the game isn't dying at all, and why after all these years, it's still able to deliver experiences that no other FPS game can come close to. And by the end of the video, we'll try to answer the real question: is Planetside 2 actually dying, or will the war on Auraxis continue for many more years? So if you ask a lot of players whether Planetside 2 is dying, many of them will immediately say yes, and to be fair, there are some strong arguments behind that position. The first thing people point to is the player numbers. The best place to track population data for the PC version is the ps2.fizu website, since many players use the standalone launcher and don't appear in the Steam statistics. Around 2 years ago, the average player count was roughly 1,000 players, with peaks of around 2,000. Earlier this year, the average was closer to 600, with peaks of around 1,400. That's close to a 50% drop in population, and the player count has been steadily declining for the past 2 years. Another thing people point to is server merges. Over the past few years, several servers have either been merged or closed entirely as populations declined. In the past year, the last 2 EU servers merged into one, and the NA servers were merged as well. For EU players, this actually helped quite a bit. The combined server is much busier, multiple continents can open, and large battles are more common again. But for the NA players, the 2 servers that merged were located on opposite sides of the country, meaning many players now have worse ping than before. Then there's the PlayStation version of the game, which has also declined significantly over the years. Population estimates suggest the console player base is now only a few hundred players at best. But the biggest issue is what all of this means for the core gameplay experience. Planetside 2's entire identity is built around massive battles, hundreds of players fighting across a continent. That's the game's biggest selling point. But as player numbers drop, those massive battles become harder to sustain. Fewer players mean fewer large fights, which means fewer of those only in Planetside moments that attract and retain new players. And that creates a negative feedback loop. Smaller battles make the game feel less impressive. When the game feels less impressive, fewer new players stay, and when fewer players stay, the battles get even smaller. On top of that, many players also point to long-standing bugs and technical issues that have existed for years. When problems like that go unresolved for long periods of time, it can make the game feel like it's no longer being actively maintained, which reinforces the idea that the game is slowly dying. Another major issue players often point to is the bugs. And the thing about bugs in Planetside 2 is that they're both a cause and a symptom of the game's age and decline. Most long-time players will recognize the kinds of problems I'm talking about, but the one bug in particular that has had a huge impact over the past few months is the no vehicle crash bug. This bug causes the game to crash if you don't pull a vehicle within the first minute or two of spawning on a new continent. For veteran players, it's annoying but manageable once you know the workaround. But for new players, it's a completely different story. A brand new player trying the game for the first time might not even make it through the tutorial without crashing, and if your first experience with the game is repeated crashes, it's easy to assume the game is abandoned and move on. If you think of player population as a simple equation, recruiting new players, retaining existing players, and losing players over time, then a bug like this can effectively eliminate the recruitment part of that equation. And that's just one example. There's also the spawn beacon timer bug, where your beacon cooldown gets stuck in an infinite loop, the no build bug, where you gather Cortium for a construction base only to find you can't place a silo, the comms bug, where the game thinks you're still holding down the voice key and mutes everyone else's audio. And then there's the classic desync bug, where you think you found an invincible enemy but you've actually desynchronized from the server. Your bullets stop registering, enemies can't see you, and your character model is frozen somewhere else on the map. Many of these bugs have existed for years, while the no vehicle crash bug has appeared on and off for several months. When issues like this persist for a long time, it can start to give players the impression that the game simply isn't being maintained the way it used to be. But despite all of these issues, there's also a strong argument that Planetside 2 isn't dying at all, because even now, more than a decade after release, the game can still deliver moments that no other FPS has managed to replicate. The scale, the number of players, the combination of infantry, armor and aircraft all fighting across a massive battlefield is something that still feels completely unique. When everything comes together, Planetside 2 is still incredible. Huge battles, coordinated platoons, armor columns pushing across open terrain, and the kind of chaotic moments that only happen when you have 1,000 players all interacting on the same map. Continents are still opening during peak hours, and large battles still happen regularly despite the lower player numbers. The core gameplay loop is also still compelling, capturing bases, coordinating with squads, setting up logistics, and fighting across a persistent battlefield is something that still feels very different from most other shooters. The game is also still receiving updates, even if they're smaller than they used to be. One recent example is the Infiltrator update, which sparked plenty of debate within the community. Some players disliked the changes, while others felt they were a step in the right direction. But the fact that updates are still happening shows the game is still being worked on, and it's possible that what we're seeing now isn't the end of the game, but simply stabilisation. Many long-running online games eventually settle into a smaller but dedicated player base where the numbers stop growing but also stop collapsing. So while the population may be lower than it once was, that doesn't mean necessarily that the game is about to disappear. So after looking at both sides of the argument, what's the real answer? Objectively speaking, Planetside 2 is currently sitting at the lowest player numbers it's ever had since launch. The PlayStation version of the game is already, for all practical purposes, dead. And eventually, there will come a point where keeping the servers running for a shrinking player base simply won't make financial sense. That's the reality for every online game eventually. But that point might not be anytime soon, because even with lower player numbers, Planetside 2 can still create the moments that made people fall in love with the game in the first place. Huge battles, chaotic fights, and the feeling that you're part of something bigger than a normal FPS game. I remember when the Cobalt and Miller servers merged in 2025. Suddenly the continents were packed, huge fights were breaking out everywhere, and for a while, the game felt incredibly alive again. Moments like that remind you why people have stuck with Planetside 2 for so many years. So maybe the real answer is this. Planetside 2 might not be growing anymore, but it's not gone yet either. And while it's still here, maybe the best thing we can do is appreciate it for what it is, because there's still nothing else quite like it. And one day, when the servers finally do go offline, I think a lot of us will look back on Planetside 2 with a huge amount of nostalgia, remembering the battles, the chaos, and the moments no other game managed to recreate. But I'm curious what you think. Do you think Planetside 2 will still be around in 3 to 5 years? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on Auraxis.